Good afternoon, everybody. This is Scott Morgan-Rothel here at the South Florida Tribune Broadcasting Network, introducing you to a brand new show that I'm here with Louis Adio Weiss, and that show happens to be 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. And you know, Louis, this is a great opportunity for you and I to talk about the great American pastime.
Yeah, I mean, it's the best game in the world, in my opinion. I love other sports, but there's no other sport that transcends time and space the way that baseball does, so I'm excited to talk about it.
So let's get an idea here so that our fans and listeners will be able to understand what the show is all about. First of all, I think one of the things that's important to note is that this is an interactive type of show. So what we'll be looking for people to do is they can chat with us when we're online, and I'll also provide our call-in number from time to time so that people can call in. If you have any baseball thoughts, observations, feel free to give us a call. And then, of course, we'll be bringing in some of the guests in the baseball world. Some of those could be players, writers, executives, you name it. We have a good foundation of those people. So it's one of those types of shows where we can go so many different ways. And you know what's even nice about it is you and I get to do some first-class debating while we take the old school philosophy along with the new school philosophy, where you guys like you at your age get caught up in stats. Guys like me have covered, not attended, okay, covered lots of games, and have had a chance to talk to a lot of the individuals for whom are involved in this great sport.
Yeah, so like he said, you know, it's old school versus new school. That's kind of going to be the, big part of this show. I mean, I wrote down before there's going to be differences of opinion and there's just going to be disagreements, but at the same time, the one thing that's going to keep us here and keep the show going is the fact that both of us have a mutual love for baseball. And, it's America's game. It's the national pastime. So, it's going to be fun to hear different perspectives and, learn from each other and, hopefully grow as thinkers of the sport.
Yeah, my first major interview as a reporter covering baseball with Tom was sort of the 1981 baseball winter meetings. And I'll tell you, Tommy and I had a great time. He was a great friend for many years. And I've been around baseball a lot of years covering spring training everywhere. But another guy that holds dearest to my heart is legendary broadcaster Ernie Harwell, who I viewed as like an uncle. And Ernie took it every time I need to talk to him or I needed a letter of recommendation or whatnot. Ernie was always there. So again, I'll have an opportunity to do a lot of spring training as I have over the years, but also with my newfound responsibilities with the Palm Beach Post this spring. And to me, spring training is just a great thing to cover because, anybody that thinks they're going to go ahead and try to keep score in spring training, go ahead and try to do that when you're covering a high school football game. You'll need a lot of whiteout. You'll need a great pencil with an eraser, or you're going to be scratching off a lot of ink. And let me tell you, none of the options are very desirable.
Yeah, if you're not an established major league player, spring training is always that time where you really want to prove yourself to, obviously, the organization, the coaches and the players in that dugout. So, spring training always reminds me of just the beginning of, no pun intended, spring and the hopes that foster with the dawn of a new season. So, I mean, yeah, again, there's no preseason like baseballs. There's no postseason like baseballs. I mean, that's the point. It's one of the main reasons why we're doing this show. It's just because we both love the game. Maybe me a little bit more than anyone else we may have on, or Scott himself. But
I don't think so. Yeah, I love the game more than I. What are you talking about?
I mean, I'd take a bullet for baseball if that were, possible. But
well,
I mean, you've been around it longer than I have. But at the same time, I think my affection for the game, yours goes back a lot, obviously a longer time, but, my affection may be shown in a more extreme way than yours, but that's not a bad thing in any case.
Well, I'll take a bulletproof vest so I can keep doing it a long time. You want to take a bullet, then your career in baseball's over. Mine, it'll last another day or two. But regardless, not promoting gun violence here on the program.
No.
By no means. But yeah, no, it's definitely a sport that I've had a lot to deal with over the years with my history with the Detroit Tigers. I know you're a South Florida guy, so you haven't had the ability to grow up with a team as I have for many years. That doesn't mean that the Marlins haven't won 2 championships, that your dad has done a really great job getting you to love the game like my dad too. And the one thing about a lot of other sports is it's a generational thing from grandpa to dad, to you, and then if you ever have children down the road, I'm sure you'll be able to educate them. And I think down the road when you have children, you'll be able to say, I was actually a broadcaster covering this sport, so I have the ability to talk about, express my feelings where a lot of individuals don't have those outlets to do so.
And yeah, I mean, that's probably the truest essence of baseball's beauty, and what separates it from other sports is, I mean, obviously history is a part of everything and context matters. I mean, you can look at every other sport and, go back and look at its history very fondly, but I think baseball's history is a generational thing. It bonds fathers to sons, grandchildren to grandparents, and, Ken Burns said it best in his documentary when he made baseball in 1994. He said, baseball is a sport where you're judged by all the ghosts of those who have came before, and I think that's what separates it from every other sport. Because, again, it's singular. There's really no other sport whose history is, almost as transcendent with the times as baseball is.
The one thing that Lewis is going to do for us here at South Florida Tribune is he will write columns from time to time on the subject matter that we do. For example, if we talk about some of the best father-son combinations in baseball, or whether it's family relationships, he will do that for us because it's only to his benefit, and he's very well aware of that if we're going to talk about it, you'll have the ability to reference his work in terms of being able to prepare for the show as we continue to talk about it heavily on social media, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, or whatever the case may be. So, and these are the things that we have the ability to utilize when we're a multimedia platform. I think what will be good about Lewis, too, is, excuse me, not only will he have the ability to talk about it on the air, but Lewis will be assigned to Florida Atlantic University baseball games from time to time, doing question and answer interviews with the coach or whatever applicable newsmakers that exist. And he'll also have an opportunity to do what I did many years ago, cover Florida State League baseball, where you have a lot of your future stars that could ultimately become in the major league. So you'll have, as this show grows and you're able to go ahead and convey what you're able to do to other places, you're going to grow as this broadcast does as well. And knowing that you're so passionate about it, I definitely tell you right now that there isn't a person in their right mind that if they don't appreciate your work, shame on them, because they're missing out on a good opportunity to be educated about arguably the greatest game in all of sports.
Yeah, it's Babe Ruth said it best when he went on his tour of Japan in 1934. It's the greatest game there ever was, and you know what? He's right. I honestly don't think anything else transcends, time and space in American culture better than baseball. Maybe jazz music and, maybe the Civil War, but, baseball is one in its own. And, I've cried over baseball 100 times. I've contemplated so much about baseball, walk around and just, think about, some of the greatest players who ever played and what it must have been like playing, obviously, in the days of Mickey Mantle and, Bob Gibson and just a plethora of other guys who, to me, those are my heroes. The guys who suited up, in the wool back in the 50s and the 60s. And, again, there's nothing like baseball. I can't really articulate it any other way than that.
You ever played Little League?
I played baseball for 10 years, and I played a couple of years in high school. So, yeah, of course, that's just another reason why it's embedded in me. It's part of my DNA.
Well, I played ball for 6 years in Detroit as well. I never made it to the high school level because my family moved from a rural industry to the suburbs, so it was a little bit more difficult for me to get to and from, but it's certainly something I wanted to do. But I'd like to think that over the years I've gone out there and made up for it in a big way, in the press box and covering it as a whole, going to numerous major league stadiums. But it is pretty neat, too. And I've covered it from all angles, from college to the pros to the major leagues. Been to an all-star game, and I've done a lot of other different things. In fact, in 1968, my dad took me to a game of the World Series when Earl Wilson of the Tigers did lose to the St. Louis Cardinals. Thankfully for the Tigers, they beat the Cardinals in 7 games. So I've seen it pretty much on a lot of different levels as well. So, however you and I get to where we're going to go, the bottom line is we've seen an awful lot anyhow. And I think what's so nice about baseball is when you think about it, you got Little League, okay, the Little League World Series, very popular on national television, and it has been for a lot of years when you associate the
Williamsport,
right, and then you also have
Omaha for the College World Series.
Right, well, that's true. I've never been to one of those, but I know that's a good event. But then you also talk about, you have Japan playing it, and it's a worldwide sport, whereas in the NFL and NBA and NHL, I think baseball has a much wider, broad range in terms of what they've been doing international for a lot longer. Don't get me wrong, the other sports are starting to catch up. Hockey's only been relegated mainly to Russia, and a lot of those European countries.
Canada.
Right, in Canada. But beyond that, baseball, you can go down to the Caribbean, pick up a stickball, and start swinging it.
And I think that's the beauty of it. Robert Creamer, who was a great writer, who I believe he wrote for, may have been USA Today back in the 70s and the 80s. One of the beautiful things he said, and I'll cite Ken Burns' documentary again, is you can play baseball anywhere. You can play it with 2 bases, you can play it with 1 base, you can play it with 3 bases, and you can play it with, like Mariano Rivera did back in the streets of Panama on the fishing harbors with a milk carton for a glove, and it can take you anywhere. Sammy Sosa, like they said about him, he had to hit his way off the island in Puerto Rico, and yeah, baseball is one of those sports. Its reach is, broader than any other game. You obviously have players from as far as there's players from Afghanistan that have played in the major leagues. There's players from obviously the USA, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, the Netherlands. Even we've had a few players from England that have made their way over. And I mean, it's a universal thing. And yeah, while in the scope of sports nowadays, it's not we don't think about it when we think of the American game because of the way that basketball has become this very cultural, it's a modern cultural phenomenon, especially more popularized in the 80s and the 90s with the advent of Jordan, Pippen, and those great Bulls teams. But I think baseball's traditionalist mentality and the fact that it's just so steeped in its history, as already stated, is one thing that I really think is, it's just unique. I can't really say it any more than I already have. It's just, that's the true beauty of baseball, and I'm so glad we actually have a show where we can talk about that and express our fondness and admiration for it. But again, there will never be a game like baseball. It's the game, in my opinion, the game to end all games.
Well, not only that too, when you think about it, and again, we're going to get into more of these as time goes on, but how difficult is it to hit a baseball? Well, Michael Jordan found out that hitting a baseball is a lot more difficult than it is slam dunking a basketball. And that's no indictment against Michael Jordan. Tim Tebow obviously played football, and meanwhile Tim obviously has done a good job progressing through the ranks, but to hit a baseball you have to have quite a science to do it.
It's the most difficult thing to do in sports, and I mean that's what makes a guy like Mike Trout or Mookie Betts or any number of offensive stars in baseball nowadays so great, because the talent level now with the advances in nutrition and just health and pretty much everything, fitness regimen, it's just the amount of factors that go into it, and the fact that these guys are the best players in the world and they can hit velocity upwards of 100 miles an hour on a consistent basis. Everyone's throwing 95, everyone's got a dirty slider. I mean, that's what makes those guys great. I honestly believe this sentiment that if you were to take a football player, and Shaq Thompson's one of them, who plays for the Carolina Panthers, once in the Arizona Fall League for the Boston Red Sox. Here's a number you don't like, Scott. He went 0 for 39 in the Fall League with 37 strikeouts.
Right.
I mean, and he obviously went to college and became a very good linebacker in the NFL. But you take a baseball player and you put him in any other sport, and I guarantee you he's going to compete. I mean, Giancarlo Stanton looks like a tight end, for God's sake.
Right.
And, Jim Thorpe was a 2-sport star. But, yeah, I would argue that baseball's athletes are some of the most talented and gifted athletes in the world, and that's, again, another reason that separates them from other sports.
Yeah, just so you know, folks, in 1987, I was the director of public relations for the Gastonia Rangers, which Sammy Sosa was on there. And there were like 12 to 14 players and coaches on that team that ended up going on to the major leagues. So that, to me, was pretty neat. But, again, we're not looking to go ahead and tell you think you're going to learn everything on one show. You're not, but this gives you a very good, strong overview about what we're going to do. So please pay attention to us on social media. Follow us on Twitter, the South Florida Tribune page at Tribune South, and as long as you please keep uploading them or downloading them. These episodes are definitely going to entertain and inform. So with that said, I know you have a bunch of things on your agenda that you want to get to, so I'll go ahead and lead off.
Yeah.
As we would say in baseball, you're going to lead it off, Louis.
So at the end of last week, we had the Silver Sluggers given out. We're not going to really talk about those because, that's already said and done. But one thing that was given out last night, the major awards, which last night was Rookie of the Year award. And for those of you who don't know, National League winner was Pete Alonso, Mets first baseman. He did set the rookie record for home runs in a season. He had 53, eclipsed Aaron Judge's record from 2017. He was, if you want to, the first mention of analytics on the show, he was a 5-WAR player of offensive rookies, first-year players in the major leagues. That's most among players in, of that caliber, of that first year. In the American League, Yordan Alvarez, the DH for the Houston Astros, won the Rookie of the Year. like Will Myers in 2013, I believe, when he debuted with the Rays. He played less than 90 games. Will Myers played 88 games that year. Alvarez played in 87 games, but what he did